Welcome. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Wigtown Wednesdays event. My name is Elsa Maishman. I'm a journalist with The Scotsman. I'll be chairing this evening. And I've got a couple of just a few housekeeping things before we start. As you'll all have noticed, you are on mute just throughout the event to make it a bit easier so Ian and I can hear each other. There will be a chance for questions at the end from yourselves. The way we're going to do this is if you can type them into the chat box, which you should find at the bottom of your screen. Just type in those questions and then I'll be the one who's reading them out and Ian will be able to answer. Feel free, if something occurs to you throughout the event, feel free to type it into the chat box at any time and we'll come to it during the question and answer section at the end. The other thing I want to say is that in the chat and on the Wigtown Book Festival website, there is a link to where you can donate to Wigtown Book Festival if you'd like to. Obviously this event is free, but please do support the festival. And there'll also be a link for where you can buy the book, which I'm sure you'll all very much want to do by the end of the evening. There's Ian holding it up. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome you to this event about The Only Gaijin in the Village by Ian Maloney, who is a Scottish writer. He was born in Aberdeen. He now lives in Japan. He's been there for 15 years, lives there with his wife, Minori, who's from Japan. Recently, he moved from an urban area to a rural village. And this book kind of charts a little bit the journey and the changes that he encountered there. So hello, Ian. Good evening.
Hello.
Or should I say good morning? It is 3 a.m. With you.
Yeah, good morning or good night, or I'm not quite sure.
Absolutely. Well, I'm very grateful. I'm sure we're all really grateful to you for making it at 3 a.m. I suppose I just wanted to start. Maybe you could kick us off with a reading from the beginning of the book, just to set the scene a little bit.
Absolutely. Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming. It's really humbling to see so many of you come out. I wish we could all be in the same room doing this in Wigtown, but unfortunately we can't. So we'll make the best of it with this. So this is The Only Gaijin in the Village, my story about moving out to rural Japan from the urban area, as Elsa said. And I'm going to read you from Chapter 1, page 1. This is a chapter called Yes, I Am a Long Way from Home. I'm going to die in Japan. At least that's the plan. Plan is the wrong word. I've not sat down like Wile E. Coyote, gripped by a wave of self-destruction and plotted my own demise, strung an anvil from the roof, or painted a tunnel on the garage door. Nor am I predicting that a North Korean missile will take me out anytime soon, though that is certainly more likely. I have the experience to prove it. It was the 29th of August, 2017. I was camping in Aomori, the most northerly prefecture on Honshu, Japan's main island. Over the water is Hokkaido, the last prefecture before Russia, then a string of disputed islands and ice. During the summer vacation, I had thrown the camping gear in the back of my car, caught up in a surge of wild man envy. I needed masculine exploits and rugged scenery. By the time I'd reached Aomori, I'd already been stung 36 times by bees, developed a fever as a result, been chased by a biker gang, and run away from a hotel before they discovered that when my fever broke, I'd sweated so much I'd turned their comfortable mattress into a waterbed. I'd been traveling for 10 days, hadn't spoken to anyone for 3, and was beginning to crack up. I woke up at about 4 a.m., packed up quickly, happy to have been undisturbed by bears, and pointed the car south. Mogwai soared through the open windows as I sped through glorious forest roads, the kind Ian Banks called Great Wee Roads, with the sun rising behind me. I joined the highway a little before 6, my intention to go as far as Sendai, refuel, and take it from there. A night in the city or another campsite? Fresh sheets or the pleasure of a lakeside sunset? My phone, acting as a sat-nav from the 100 yen holster I taped to the dashboard, started buzzing like 36 bees had got inside it, immediately followed by a screeching alarm, far louder than the ear-hurting stereo volume. It was the J alert. J alert is a nationwide warning system designed with two functions. The first is to give people a few seconds notice in advance of an earthquake or other disaster. A few seconds is all science can give us, but it can make a lot of difference. It can be enough time to turn off the gas cooker, to get away from the windows, to get out the shower, and avoid the indignity of running from the house in soapy humiliation. The second is to scare the living shit out of people. With a volume and tone similar to the howler letters in Harry Potter, think an air horn attached to a bullhorn being held down by someone intent on giving you a heart attack, the J alert has caused me to leap from bed in the small hours, stub a toe, crack a shin, hit my head, and fall to the floor in terror. This time, it caused me to swerve wildly into the outside lane. Luckily, the highway was empty. The alarm finished, I righted my direction and pulled back into the inside lane. Japanese highways are raised affairs, literal highways on massive concrete legs with high sides to keep the noise in and to keep the noise in. During the 1995 earthquake, the raised highway in Kobe flipped over. If there was a big earthquake, I wanted to be somewhere less flippable. I wanted to be on a great wee road, ideally in Scotland. After the alarm, an electronic female voice announced in Japanese, "Missile launch, missile launch." What? Missile launch, missile launch. I thought that's what you said. I pulled the phone from its slot and tried to read the alert, in Japanese, in a tiny font, still doing about 100 kilometers per hour on the highway. Not bright, but, special circumstances. Missile launch, get to a safe place, find somewhere underground, or go inside a strong building. High in the air on a concrete strip, the next exit was 20 kilometers away. No further information from the J alert. I went onto Twitter. The alert was already trending, but every tweet was a variation of WTF. I phoned Minori, my wife. What? What's happening? I'm asleep. No, with the missile. What missile? The alert. Are you drunk? Put on the news and call me back. As I waited, I remembered that the day before, driving north, I'd been stuck behind a convoy of military vehicles, trucks, jeeps, and something that looked so suspiciously like a rocket launcher that I took a photo. For about 30 minutes, I'd trailed this convoy. I'd assumed there was a base nearby, though the surprised expressions and pointed fingers of villagers made me suspect not. They'd turned off a few kilometers before my junction, and I'd thought no more about it. Now the presence of that rocket launcher seemed ominous. Did they know something? Hi, where are you? On the highway in Aomori. What's going on? The TV says it's a test. North Korea? Of course, it flew over Hokkaido and landed in the sea. She had this tone like it was the most mundane thing in the world, like she was reciting the weather forecast or responding to me telling her about my day. So we're not at war? Not yet. What are your plans? I was going to go to Sendai. Now I'm not so sure. Okay, drive safe. Let me know if a war starts. Okay. As I drove south, I pondered my situation. If war did break out, what would I do? In many ways, I was already in the best place. I was in the middle of nowhere, or at least very close to it, with enough provisions to last a week, maybe 2 if I was careful. I had a car full of camping gear, water, food fresh and dried, but I was a long way from home. What would I do? Should I make a dash for home, or hole up in the forest and wait it out? Scenes from various post-apocalyptic films played out. Soon I was imagining a zombie infestation and making plans. By 10 a.m. I'd reached Sendai. I I came off the highway and refueled. I was exhausted, stiff, itchy, and sore, and now Kim was lobbing missiles at me. The holiday was over. Time to go home. In 12 hours, I drove more than 1,000 kilometres, stopping at service stations for lunch and dinner. When I swung into the driveway, I felt the tension seep away. I was home. This is where I want to die. Home is where the heart stops.
Thank you, Ian. That's a brilliant beginning, a brilliant reading to kick us off. I wanted to ask, obviously you've been in Japan for a while. It's been 15 years, I think, before that event that you describe and before you started writing the book. Was the memoir brewing all that time that you were there?
I suppose in hindsight, yes, it was, but certainly not consciously. There are a lot of really bad memoirs about living in Japan. A lot of people will come to Japan for 1 year, write their memoir based on their blogs and their diaries when they were here, leave Japan, and then publish the book. So there's a lot of books that are just, oh my God, isn't Japan weird? It's all neon and kanji and karaoke and chopsticks and raw fish, and there's so many books like that. So there are some very good ones, but there are also some really bad ones. And I didn't want to add to the pile of bad Japan books. So for a long time, I vowed I was never going to do one. I write book reviews for the Japan Times, so I've given a number of these books bad reviews in my time. So I really don't want to sort of again add to the pile. But so we moved out here in 2016. We moved to the countryside, and around that time, 2016, 2017, I was asked to write a column for a website out here called Gaijin Pot. And I'd published 3 novels, written another one, which by all accounts is not very good. It was probably never going to be published, and was looking around for something new to do, for me, a new style of writing, a new genre to work in. I like jumping genres and trying new things. So I thought, I'll give this a try, write some scenes from my own life, write some nonfiction, but I really wanted to write comedy. I wanted to write sort of comic episodes. So I gave it a go, and it proved quite popular. I was getting quite a lot of hits on the website, and my agent and a few other people were going, write a book, turn it into a book, write your memoir, come on. So I did, and this is it.
Brilliant. Yeah, we're very glad you did. You talk about comedy. It's a really funny book. For anyone who's not read it, who's not had the chance, and you definitely should. It does get you giggling throughout. In terms of the memoir, obviously you say you've written a few fiction books. Was it a bit of a shock to the system to be writing about real people for the first time?
It was really difficult because I'd never really written about myself before. I've written a lot of nonfiction for newspapers, magazines, travel writing, things like that, but never really about me, more about, people I've encountered or places I've been. And my brain, when I'm writing, my brain works best in fiction, is where I started. And the problem with nonfiction is you can't make stuff up. So I would be sitting there going, right, oh, that's a good story. And I've got my neighbors make great characters. And the part of my brain that plans fiction and comes up with stories was going, oh, I could take that character and that character, put them together, create this scene. That would be really funny. And then go, oh, no, hang on, that didn't happen, though. I can't write that. So that was really difficult. I sort of had to keep throwing out things that I thought were good ideas, because unfortunately they never happened. But there's enough kind of enjoyable and weird and exciting experiences have actually happened that I could still write the book. But yeah, it was difficult. I had to keep reminding myself that my neighbors are real people and not characters that I can manipulate. So.
Absolutely. Talking of those weird and wonderful and chaotic experiences, I was going to ask if there are any kind of standout moments of culture shock or misunderstanding that stood out for you, that maybe you look on, they might have been horrific at the time, but you look back in laughter?
Yeah, there's many. The book's packed with them.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of moving here, like moving to the countryside, almost immediately we had a quite a big, what we thought at the time was quite a big problem. In that, so when we moved in, we were living in an apartment about 45 minutes drive from here. So we were both still working as we were moving. So I was packing the car and taking the stuff out of the apartment and moving here. And my wife and her parents were at the new house, sort of cleaning everything and putting up curtains and that kind of thing, getting it ready. So I wasn't at the new house much, driving back and forth and going to work. And I came to the house one evening after doing all that stuff, and my wife was kind of really upset. I was like, oh God, what's happened? And she said, oh, the one of the neighbors came round, and the head of the neighborhood association, they came round to introduce themselves and say hello, and they got really angry, and they said there's a problem with the trees. We've got these big beautiful cherry blossom trees in the garden, and we need to cut down these trees. There's 3 trees that are a big problem. We've got to get rid of them. And she was getting really, really stressed and worked up about it. But it was about 10 o'clock at night, so there's nothing I could do about it, nothing we could do. Well, okay, let's sleep on it. And the next day, I went out into the garden, and I saw my neighbor out in his garden. He's a retired man. He's out in the garden every day. So I went over and introduced myself, sort of gearing up for a fight, basically thinking, oh, here we go. First day, basically, we're gonna have a fight. And my Japanese is passable, but definitely not good enough to get into an argument with the neighbors. So I went over and sort of introduced myself and said, my wife says there's a problem with the trees. Okay, we'll do something about it, but we haven't even unpacked yet. And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, my wife said, you want us to cut down these trees? He's like, no, I never said anything like that. All I said was that these trees are your trees, so they're your responsibility to look after. And these ones are mine, and I'll look after them. I was like, oh, so you don't want us to cut down the cherry blossom trees? He was like, oh my God, no, don't. They're so beautiful in spring. Don't cut them down. So it all started, more than anything, it was my wife kind of had the culture shock, even though she's Japanese and from this area. And speaks the language as a native speaker. She kind of had this culture shock, this huge misunderstanding that bizarrely I managed to sort out with my broken Japanese and strange pronunciation. So that was kind of the initial stressful culture shock, I guess.
Oh, well, I'm glad. I'm glad he didn't want you to cut down the trees, and you managed to sort it out in the end. Obviously, that's a really important point. A lot of the book is about the differences between Scottish and Japanese culture, but there's also a lot of differences between the urban area where you lived in Japan and then the rural area, and the differences between them. What were kind of and feel free to draw on a reading or an example or anything, but what were the kind of the most difficult things you found between that urban and rural lifestyle?
Between urban and rural, I mean, I grew up kind of out in the countryside in Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a kid, I grew up out in Aberdeenshire. So in terms of the obvious differences are things like it's quieter, there's less
Mm-hmm.
things to do, there's less people around, which is great. I mean, that's kind of why we moved out here. But I suppose the biggest difference between rural Japan and urban Japan, and between Japan and Scotland, is the sort of civic responsibilities, community duties. So I guess everywhere did traditionally, a long time ago, you had sort of community groups and everybody came together to do certain tasks that benefited the whole area. But in Scotland, they've pretty much gone, certainly as an organized thing. And in Japan, in the cities, because cities are big and full of young people and you don't know your neighbors, they don't exist. But out here, they're still very strong and very formal. community groups, and we have a community association that we're part of, and you have duties that you have to perform. You can't get out of them. You actually get fined by the community association if you don't, which is it's actually a lot of hassle, because it's all based on the idea that you have 3 generations of a family living in the house. So the grandparents, parents, and children will all stay in the same house. So there's always somebody there, and the parents are usually retired. So there's always somebody with free time. And traditionally the wife stays at home and doesn't work, and the husband goes out to work. So there's always somebody that's home and has free time. There's just me and Minori, and she's a nurse. So she's working night shifts and all that kind of thing. I teach at a university. So in terms of time, it's a real hassle, but you do it. You kind of have to do it. And I quite like it in a way. So, yeah, probably, if it's all right, I'll read a little bit rather than explain one of them. So one of the duties we have, so we meet up. This area is quite relaxed compared to others. We have about 4 times a year. There's chores, I guess, you have to do. So to read, my first experience was litter collection. Split into teams, the theory is that we cover a certain area, picking up rubbish, man-made or acts of God, thereby bringing beauty and order to our pocket of Japan. In theory, as any economist, political leader, or parent will tell you, the gap between theory and practice is big enough to handbrake turn a double-decker bus through. Litter collection is designated a man's job. Some jobs here are women's jobs, like cleaning the meeting hall, guarding the aforementioned garbage sites and cleaning them afterwards, and serving snacks and drinks at the meetings. Anything outdoors is a man's job. We prune trees, trim the verges with unnecessarily powerful but fun strimmers, massacre bamboo groves with home centre approved serrated machetes, and walk the streets, keeping it safe from stray tissues and cigarette butts. I haven't seen this demarcation specified in writing, but it is understood. It was therefore with much amusement that my wife waved me off at 7 in the morning, barely raising her head from the pillow to laugh. Our team consists of me, Asai, Goto-san, a divorced man in his 50s who lives alone, and Ishikawa, who has 3 happy, highly energetic, noisy young daughters and leaves for work early, returning late. I'm meeting Goto for the first time. Ishikawa grunts an "Ohio" before releasing a smoker's cough that sounds like an IED going off under a tank. Goto gives me a nod and the last 2 syllables of an "Unas." It's Sunday morning. We all work hard. None of us want to be doing this, and by the look of things, I'm not the only one who indulged in a little light refreshment the night before. Prepped in advance by Asai, I have a pair of gloves and a plastic bag. Goto has a bag sticking out of his pocket and no gloves. Asai has a pair of gloves tucked under his belt and no bag. Ishikawa has a can of coffee and a packet of cigarettes. We set off down the street. The thing is, our area is spotless. The only people who ever come here are residents, family, or those on business, delivering, fixing, or selling things. There's no through road. No one litters. Anything the wind brings in from outside is immediately picked up. There are no businesses that might inadvertently cause trash. There are literally no businesses. A local ordinance stipulates that the land here can be used for residential or farmland, nothing commercial. So this is a waste of time. We walk about 50 meters down the road. I find a plastic bottle cap that seems to have been embedded in the ground since the Paleocene and pries it out. We continue. Asai fills the silence by pointing out which vegetables are growing in each patch. Each patch is the same as the one before. We pass another team of similarly sullen Ohayos. Are they in our area or are we in there? They have empty bags as well. Asai leads us through a shortcut by the meeting hall and loops us back home. Ishikawa drops his cigarette end in his can and drops the can in the bag. We reach home. Asai goes inside and comes out with 4 cans of coffee. We sit on his wall drinking them, him talking about the weather and the trees, us 3 silent, but for slurps and sighs. Goto gives another us and disappears inside. It's 7:17 a.m. Is that it? I ask Asai. We were seen, he says. It's enough. So yeah, there are duties here that we have to perform, but it's almost all for show. You show people that you're willing to join in, you're willing to help out, and actually you do as little as possible and then go home. So in that sense, same as everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you noticed that this kind of slightly different rural life has changed you a little bit since you've been living there?
I think it has. I mean, it's hard to tell in a way because I came to Japan when I was 24, and I turned 40 in a couple of months. So, hopefully I've changed a lot between when I was 24 and now. Anyway, I'd be very depressed if I still behaved the same as I did when I was 24. So I've changed a lot. Being in Japan generally has made me more aware of myself, more aware of my surroundings. I'm big for Japan. I'm about average size for Scotland, but out here I'm much taller than everyone else. I'm much bigger than everyone else. I've got blonde hair and a beard. So I stand out a lot in Japan, and I take up a lot more space than the average Japanese person. So that very fact has made me a lot more self-aware out here. Being out in the countryside I'll tell you one thing actually, it's made me a calmer driver than I ever was, because out here the majority of the drivers are in their 70s. They drive very, very slowly, and they drive very, very all over the place, and they're my neighbors, so I can't blast the horn, I can't overtake them. I just have to patiently sit behind them until we all get home again. So yeah, it's made me a patient, better driver, I think.
Okay, that's a good side effect, I guess. And I also, I mean, reading the book, a lot comes through about kind of nature and spending time outside. You seem to assimilate. There's a lot. The fire pit plays quite a heavy role. There's a lot of sitting outside and enjoying the fire pit. Do you think that in that way you also kind of appreciate the outdoors a little bit more?
Yeah, I do love it. I mean, as I say, I grew up in the countryside. I was a kid who played in fields and forests and things like that. So I do love the countryside anyway. But yeah, a big garden was a large part of what we were looking for. So when we first, it took us a few years to find the land, to find this house, because we were looking for something quite unconventional for the average buyer in Japan. People want convenience. They want to be near work, near train stations, near shops, and we kind of wanted to be as far away as possible. So we looked at a lot of places, but yeah, the thing that sold me on this place, the second I walked on the land, was the fire pit. So the guy, I've moved it from his original location, but the previous owners, he dug a fire pit and got railway sleepers, like big heavy bits of wood, and made benches around it and dug this big hole for the fire, so you can cook on it. You can have a proper barbecue on the fire. And yeah, I just love that, sitting outside with some music, with a book, with a beer, and get the fire going. And we have Mount Ontake on the horizon, which is just a beautiful sort of snow-capped volcano. And yeah, when we first came to view the house, we didn't even look inside the house for the first 40 minutes or so. We just went in the garden and walked around and chatted to the owners about the garden. So yeah, that was a big part of it, the fire pit, and being able to grow our own vegetables and that kind of thing was also very important.
Absolutely. Okay. You mentioned just your childhood growing up in Aberdeenshire and that kind of thing. Are there things you still miss about Scotland?
There are. I mean, the main thing I miss is people. I've been here 15 years. So when I first came out, you miss the obvious things. Like I missed Iron Brew and I missed good real ale. You can't get that out here, and things like that. Haggis, I really miss haggis. You cannot get haggis in Japan, even though one of the reasons I fell in love with Japan in the first place is because it was the only place I've ever been where when I describe what haggis is, they go, "Oh, that sounds really nice." So that was great for me. But after a while, after a few years, you start to miss those kind of things less and less, or you find substitutes, but you don't find substitutes for family, for friends, for people. So that's the main thing I miss. So I try to get back as often as I can. I was back in March, just before all this horribleness started. And yeah, it is nice going home. There's the countryside here and the countryside in Scotland, they're very different. There's a lot of things the same about being in rural areas, but it's a very different geology. It's a very different landscape. And when I went back in March, we went driving out into Aberdeenshire, and just the green rolling hills and seeing cows in fields was strangely nostalgic. You don't really see cows and sheep in the fields out in Japan. Maybe a bit more up in Hokkaido, but certainly not around here. So yeah, I miss cows and fields, strangely.
Okay, perfectly good things to miss. Was there a particular reasoning for yourselves and Minori choosing Japan rather than Scotland to settle in together?
There's a few things. So I came out in 2005 with the intention of coming for a year teaching English. I have a master's degree in creative writing, so I'm completely unsuited for the job market in any way. So I had no idea what I wanted to do to that, apart from write. And, unless you write about boy wizards, you're not going to make any money out of this. So I came out in 2005 with the plan of staying for a year, saving a bit of money, and then moving on to Korea or China or Thailand or somewhere else, and just doing the usual thing of traveling and teaching and seeing a bit of the world, until I came up with a better idea. And I had a 12-month contract, and after 6 months they said, right, you need to decide now, are you staying for another year or are you going home? And I was like, I've just got here. I haven't even unpacked. I've just about learned how to write my name in Japanese. Yeah, I'll stay for another year. So I signed on for a second year, and then I started dating Minori. And at the end of that 2-year period, when I started dating Minori, she wanted to come to Britain to study English. She'd already applied when we started going out. So it seemed like a good opportunity. We came back and lived in Edinburgh for a year. She studied English. I got my CELTA qualifications. But this was 2007. The economy was very quickly going down the toilet. And at that time, a master's in creative writing became even less marketable than it was before. So just on purely sort of financial basis, Japan is the obvious choice. Minori's a nurse. To work in Britain, she'd have to retrain, do language schools and stuff, whereas here she can already work. I can teach English here, and writing you can do anywhere. But also we just felt a lot more comfortable here. There's a couple of unfortunate incidences in Edinburgh with kind of little bits of racism directed towards Minori, which made me feel really uncomfortable. And I mean, obviously made her feel bad, but made me feel sort of embarrassed, basically, about, I've taken you to my country and idiots have behaved this way. And obviously I've had similar experiences here, but I don't know. I didn't feel comfortable there with her experience in that, whereas I felt here, it's me, so I can take it. So that was kind of in there. And luckily we did, because then in 2012 the government changed all their immigration laws, and it became very unwelcoming, as was Theresa May's plan. So from that point on, it was just like, yeah, we're going to live in Japan now. So yeah.
Okay. And sounds not to have been a a bad decision, for all of its different reasons. That you speak, that it really shines through in the book, of a kind of love for Japan, your new home, where you're going to die eventually, as you say. One other aspect of the book I wanted to ask about. We're approaching maybe soon the time for a few questions, but I also wanted to ask about the influence of music throughout the book. Yourself, you're a musician. You talk about being in the band. What kind of role did that play?
Yeah, I mean, I love music. Music's always been a big part of my life, and it was one of the first things I did. I don't really write about this much in the book, but one of the first things I did when I came to Japan was like seek out live music venues and people in bands and that kind of scene, I guess, because that's what I'm comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm in a band now, and I have Minori is very, very angry because we have Japanese houses always have, even if they're Western style, which our one is quite modern Western style house, they have one traditional room that's all tatami floors and sliding doors, and you know exactly what you imagine when somebody says imagine a Japanese room. And when we moved in, I've got about 9 guitars and a electric piano and a bunch of things. When we moved in, I was just like, I'll just put them in here to keep them out of the way, not telling her that this is now my music room, my studio. So over the last few years, I've basically taken over one end of the house, and after about a year, she was like, "You're not moving that stuff, are you? You've taken this over," because tatami makes great soundproofing, so good for that. But yeah, there's the music runs through the book as well. Each chapter is named after a song that's either apposite for the scene or means something to me, which started just as a way for me to amuse myself. A lot of writers, I think, do this when you're drafting something. You just put in things that amuse you to make the writing process easier, and that was one of the things, basically making up a soundtrack for the book. And my editor has similar tastes in music, so she was like, "Oh yeah, I like this song. Let's keep them as titles," and it survived through. But it meant I could go on Spotify and make up a proper soundtrack. So if anyone's interested, there are on Spotify there are playlists for each of the sections of the book. They go through it.
Oh wow! Are there? Is that each song, the song that each chapter is named after? Is it a playlist of all of those songs?
It is, yeah. There's a couple that aren't on Spotify, so there's like dodgy replacements or cover versions or something like that. But yeah, they're mostly up there, and yeah, a few of them are already up on Twitter. I can post links to that later on if anyone's interested.
Yeah, I mean, someone definitely is. They've just have put in as a question, can we have a link to the playlist? So yeah, maybe if we can make that available on some kind of social media, I'm sure people would be interested. I'm gonna just maybe check and see if we've got any questions that we could take a look at. Hopefully we'll get to as many as we can. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to type them on in the chat box. One I did see just recently, they've introduced a question from Frederick. So hello, Frederick, thank you for your question. They said, how do the children in your area view you? And do you have any interesting experiences of that?
How do the children view me? Some of them are like very young ones are just like hello to whoever goes by, the way young kids are. And some of them are shy, hesitant around. I am the only foreigner, so I stand out a bit. Most of them are fine. I teach English to a couple of the teenagers around because they've got high school exams, university entrance exams. Yeah, we don't have kids. Maroon and I don't have kids, so we don't have the usual way when you move into a community. If you have kids, your kids go to school, you meet the other parents and everybody. We kind of don't have that connection, that bond, which makes things a bit different. There's very few natural ways where I come into contact with most of the kids, apart from the ones that that live next door. But yeah, we get on fine. I mean, kids and adults. Everybody's been very, very welcoming here. I haven't had any sort of negative responses. Some people are not that interested in me, which is fair enough. You know, most people in Scotland weren't all that interested in me when I lived there. And some, you know, I was a novelty when I first moved in, so there was lots of questions, and then that wore off, and now I'm just someone else who lives here. So yeah, it's been great. It's been no problems.
Okay, good to hear. I'll take another question. Someone's just asked, who are your favorite Japanese writers?
Oh, I could go on about this for hours. Furukawa Hideo is probably my favorite. Check him out. If anyone's looking over my shoulders, some Japanese books, you can see all the Murakami ones up about there. Yeah, Murakami, Miyako Kawakami, Hiromi Kawakami, both the Kawakamis. Both the Murakamis are great, Mishima. But yeah, Furukawa Hideo, if anybody's looking for a book. Belka, Why Don't You Bark by Furukawa Hideo is always my recommendation for Japanese fiction. But yeah, anything.
Okay.
It's all good.
Okay, that should be enough to give someone a head start. We should say that this session this evening is being recorded, so it should be available at some point online. So if you didn't catch all of those authors, you'll be able to go back and have a wee look at it. Another question that I've just seen that I thought was quite interesting is someone said, landscape or types of cultural landscape seem important to Japanese people. Can you say anything about this aspect of life in Japan? And I remember from the book there are a few references to this, especially from your garden. So
yeah, I mean, in terms of like actual physical landscape, one of the fascinating things I learned about is Japanese garden design, where they have the idea of borrowed landscape, which I love. The idea of you design your garden in such a way that it fits into the hills in the background, or the forest, or the river, or whatever. So we have Ontake, the volcano, in the background of our garden, and it's sort of the previous owners, there was generations of them. It was their land, family land for generations. It's sort of designed in a way that accentuates the view of the mountain, which is, you know, is fantastic. There's a famous saying about Japan that J. David Simons used as the title of his fantastic novel about Japan, which is an exquisite sense of the beautiful. This idea that, you know, if you go to the temples in Kyoto or something, there's just absolutely stunning. They have an exquisite sense of the beautiful, but very little sense of the ugly. So you can go to Kyoto and there's a beautiful temple, and then you turn a few degrees away and there's a rusty corrugated iron garage and a pachinko parlor and a garage and a gas station, stuff like that. So it's all kind of mixed in, is sort of the stereotype about Japan. But yeah, you get these sort of, it's a very Instagrammable country, as the young people are finding out now. So yeah, there's a lot of beauty around. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah. I hope so. Do you come into contact with many other? You just mentioned Instagrammable for tourists. Do you come into contact with many tourists or other foreigners visiting?
Not really, not up here where we are. There's not many tourist attractions, so it's kind of off the beaten path. You really have to have a car for a start to come up here. But I work at a university in Nagoya, so I meet fellow teachers for a start.
Mm-hmm.
But once you get to kind of working in universities, it's lifers. It's people like me who've been here for decades or longer, and that doesn't make sense. Decades or longer for you, for decades. They've been here for centuries. Yeah.
It does make sense. I mean, a decade. You've been there 15 years. That's a decade and a bit longer.
So yeah, I don't meet very many sort of young foreigners that come, people that did what I did and coming out to work at a language school after university. I tend not to bump into them now, which is a shame in a way, but also one of the problems with that kind of lifestyle is most people are on 12-month contracts when they go abroad to teach. So people come and go all the time. So making friends is almost impossible in that kind of community. People are just here and disappearing, and everyone's on a different cycle. So it's kind of much nicer now, I think, for people like me, that because the people I meet are also settled in Japan, you can make stronger, better relationships, I think, than when I was younger. So
Okay.
yeah. But a narrower pool, I guess.
There's another question that came in a few minutes ago while we were talking. I'm wondering if I can find it, but I remember what it said. It was, have you introduced the Japanese to the deep fried Mars bar? And it got me thinking about food in general and those kind of experiences that can throw up.
Yeah, I haven't introduced them. They might be interested in it, though. It's before I came out, people were saying to me, "Oh, when you get to Japan, you're going to be so healthy and you're going to lose so much weight. You're just going to be eating rice and vegetables and raw fish." And I get here, and most things are deep fried or grilled, in some description. Every area has their own special food, and Nagoya, the sort of area I came first, their specialty dish is fried chicken wings, spicy chicken wings. So they like their deep fried food just as much as Scotland does. So the Mars bar might go across. To be honest, I've never had a deep fried Mars bar. This is I'm convinced.
Oh.
I'm convinced this is like Nessie. It's one of those things we just tell the tourists about. But I may be wrong. I may be just inexperienced in the ways of my own country.
Yeah, clearly you've got a few things to tick off on the to-do list next time you come over.
I have had the deep fried pizza, which is a really good way to make my Italian friend cry, is to tell her about what we do to pizzas in Scotland.
Oh no. Have there been any? I guess it's a really easy stereotype, and I know we've talked about not falling into those traps. But were there any kind of difficult experiences with food? Have there been any surprises or shocks?
Yeah, I write about one in the book. I'm not sure where it is, so I won't read it. But I was served whale bacon once, which I didn't know what it was. I was just given a plate. Here, try this, and being polite. And okay, I'll try that. And it's absolutely revolting. It's disgusting. Like I've said this for a long time. If you want to get people to stop catching whales, to stop hunting whales, just get them to try it. And it's so bad, you immediately stop. So yeah, that was a horrible experience. So whale meat, insects. This area, they like eating grasshoppers and bee larvae and things like that. So that's the bad stuff. There's some good stuff. I've eaten a horse a few times. So it's not just an idiom. I had probably the weirdest thing is a horse meat curry donut. So a donut filled with curry sauce, which is quite common. You get curry donuts, but it was a curry made out of horse meat. So that was in Kumamoto. That was an experience. I recommend everybody gives that a go. If you ever go to Kumamoto, try that.
Was it a positive experience or just an experience?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's when you know what it is, it's fine. It's not like a Tesco lasagna where you think it's beef, but actually it's horse. It's this was properly advertised, and I was like, I'll give it a try. I'll give most things a try once. The only thing that I've been served that I will not try is snake, which my father-in-law loves and keeps trying to get me to eat. When we catch a snake in the garden, he tries to get me to eat it, and that's not happening. There's nothing will get me to eat a snake. So.
There are a couple of good, or at least one good anecdote in the book I remember of an altercation between you and a snake.
Yeah, the snakes play a big part in my life in the country. Snakes and centipedes. So it's weird actually. In the last couple of days, a lot of the things that I wrote about in the book have happened again. So was it yesterday or the day before? There was an earthquake in Gifu, so the alarms went off, like the J alert and everything went off. And then I found a big centipede on the stairs when I was going to bed last night. So yeah, it's there's a lot of anecdotes about in the book about Japan trying to kill me in various ways. So
Hopefully not doesn't succeed anytime soon. Go on.
I was just going to say, they say Japan is safe, and it really is, but apart from, earthquakes and snakes and centipedes and volcanoes and all that kind of stuff, Scotland's safe. Scotland's very safe.
This is something, hasn't it, that's been maybe a deterrent to other people coming and visiting you, the worries about Japan not being so safe.
Yeah, my mother in particular is not a fan of things that creep and things that crawl, and bees in particular. So everyone, I think it's in America just now, they're going on about the murder hornets, and we had them way before they were cool. We've had them for years. Massive bees that, yeah, they are terrifying. Like, I'm not scared of normal bees in Britain. See, a bumblebee or something. These are, I mean, murder hornet's quite a good name for them. They are just big, scary things. So yeah, we've had a few of those around, but yeah, so that puts my mum off quite a lot coming out.
I can imagine. Let me just have a look for another question. We've got a few more coming in. I'll see how many we have time for. One of them has asked, she's just asked if you read the authors you mentioned in Japanese or English.
Oh, in English. In English. I've read my spoken Japanese is kind of good enough to like chat with my friends in Japanese, but reading the kanji is, I can read like newspaper headlines and that kind of thing, but reading actual novels is way beyond me. I've read one Murakami book in Japanese. It's a short one, a non-fiction book about Scotland, because it isn't in English and it's about Scotland. So I thought, oh, I want to read that. And that took me at least a year to read, maybe 50, 60 pages. So no, I read them in English, but I'm friends with a few translators from Japanese to English. So I have long conversations with them about the difference, how the translations work, and if this book's a good translation and that kind of thing. So I want to get to the point at some point where I can read them, but it's a long way off. In terms of learning languages, so when I moved to Japan, one of my friends from university moved to the Netherlands at the same time. So I started learning Japanese and he started learning Dutch. And the thing with European languages is they all use the same alphabet. So you're already starting. Like, I was functionally illiterate in Japan. I had to learn the alphabet, all three of them, straight off. And so after a year, I could write my name, and he was reading Harry Potter in Dutch. So it's I still haven't read Harry Potter in Japanese. Although I think that one's quite easy because they have katakana for all the loan words, and most of Harry Potter is words like Quidditch, which are just rendered as Quidditch. There's no Japanese translation for things like that. So,
yeah. I mean, it's almost cheating, right? Isn't it? If it's a loan word. Someone has just asked, and I'm also interested to know, will your book be translated into Japanese, or do you know if there's a plan to translate it?
I hope so. I mean, it's all down to rights. I had somebody contact me on Twitter that had translated a bit of it, and that was quite exciting to read it. There are no official plans, as far as I know. The rights haven't been sold or anything. So if anybody wants to, then it's available to all languages. Yeah, I'd like to say I've got a lot of Japanese friends that haven't read any of my books and keep saying, oh, we want to read it. But yeah, I can't imagine somebody taking on the task without having the rights and a publisher that's interested first. And that all is translations into Japanese of English language books is a weird thing, because the book pretty much has to be a bestseller in the US before the Japanese publishers will become interested in it. So that's a hard bar to get across, to get over, is that. So yeah, if anybody wants a Japanese translation, buy many copies.
That's the way to get to it. Okay. Does that mean if it's not in Japanese, does that mean a lot of the people that you write about, maybe the neighbors and Minori's family as well, haven't read it or don't know what you're saying?
Yes, is a short answer to that.
That's perfect.
Because there's lots of real people in it. You know, I did fact checking and clearance with everybody that could. But yeah, going to my neighbors and saying, hey, I've written a book that you're in and you don't know any English, so you can't read it, but trust me, it's all good, was going to be way too much trouble. So but about a month ago, I got interviewed by the local newspaper here about it. So they're going to run an article, and I fully expect on that day to have a queue of old men at my door going, what's this? We'll see what happens. But yeah, it's all positive. I think the only two people that come out of the book with any kind of negativity are me and Theresa May. So I think Michael Gove gets a bit of a kick in as well, but yeah, mainly me. So.
Oh, well, I'm sure they wouldn't have any complaints. As you say, it's all very positive. Ian, that brings us pretty much to the end of our evening. I just want to say to everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a really great event. Hopefully you've enjoyed it as well. Just to remind you again, you can donate and contribute to Wigtown Book Festival. There is a link. There's a couple that have been posted into the chat box, and they'll be online as well. And secondly, the book is available for sale. Please do order your copy. It's a brilliant read. I would heartily recommend it. So you can do that either in the chat box or online as well. So the final thing to say is just thank you so much to Ian for this evening. It's been really good. And thank you everyone for coming. What's going to happen now is the call will end in a few minutes. Myself and Ian are just going to head off, and you guys as well are free to shut down your screens, or our facilitators are going to close the call in a minute. But for now, thank you very much. It's been brilliant. Hope you've enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you all so much for coming. If you still have questions, I'm on Twitter at Ian Maloney. So I will tweet the Spotify links, and I can still answer questions. Maybe not now. It's 4 a.m. here. I'm going to bed right now. When I wake up,
you've earned it. You've earned it, Ian. You've earned a sleep.
Thank you
okay.
all so much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm going to head off, and Ian will do so as well. Thank you again, everybody. Really appreciate it. Bye.